Welcome to another Secret Influence TV interview. I'm Nick Ronald and I'm very excited to be talking to Richard Reed, talking about charisma and charm. Richard is a psychologist and a coach. So I'd like to say welcome, Richard. Welcome to Secret Influence TV.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So just to start off, can you explain what you do?
Well, I work with a range of different challenges and situations. So I work with individuals, I work with businesses, and I guess everything that I do is really about helping people and organisations to be the best they can be. So whether that's working with somebody who's got severe PTSD, an organisation that is maybe struggling, or even when it comes to charisma, helping people to unlock the skills and the ability that they've already got.
And would you say, I mean, have you always been interested in this area of sort of psychology? Is it something you've always worked in and always been interested in?
I've definitely always been interested in it, but I haven't always worked in it. I guess from a very early age, I was, I'd like to think, fairly emotionally intelligent, always interested in sort of what motivated people and people's behaviour. But actually, I started off with a very different career. So I actually did a degree in classics at university.
Okay.
Then went into IT, worked in business consultancy for quite a while. And it's really sort of the last 15 years or so that I've worked as a psychologist and a coach.
So what led you to make that change from very sort of different career paths?
I've always been a bit of a polymath, so always sort of interested in lots of different areas. But I guess it increasingly realising that my interest and my satisfaction came from working with people, not from working with systems or machines, but it was really the people side of things that appealed to me. So I wanted to do something that was more dedicated towards that.
Okay, and you appeared in an article in the Metro on charm and charisma recently. Okay. How do you define charm and charisma? How do you define it?
I think charm is about giving people the feel-good factor, but for me, and obviously the different people have different definitions of this. For me, charm is really about there's an element of manipulation about it to get what we want. In terms of the charisma that I coach people on, yes, it is about creating more situations that benefit us, but it's also about thinking about the impact we have on other people, or that we can have on other people. So how is it that we can create more win-win situations where we are recognizing other people's needs from a genuine, authentic, caring point of view, and we're trying to bring other people with us. We're trying to elevate other people, inspire other people, whilst also getting what we need from situations. So it's really about creating I guess what you call a virtuous circle, rather than that situation where we say what we need to say to appeal to people, but actually it's not what we genuinely think or feel, and it's really about caring about other people.
Okay. Well, why do you think charm and charisma? Well, charm and charisma. I mean, but why do you think it's so important a skill or attribute to have?
I guess because we need to connect with people's emotions. So I guess as human beings, particularly within a work context, we like to think about ourselves as rational creatures, but we're not. We're not. However much we dress it up, we do have that rational aspect, but we are very much driven by instincts and emotion, and we need to recognise that within ourselves, so we can manage that or harness that. But we also need to manage it within other people. So quite often I work with people where they're very frustrated, they're very capable in terms of what they're doing. Everything they're saying makes sense, but actually it doesn't press the right buttons with people. So we need to understand what it is that people need from us, and wherever possible, try and align our message with those emotional instincts within other people.
Okay. Who are some great examples of people who stand out having sort of strong charisma? Who are some people you perhaps admire for having
I guess one of the classic examples for me would be somebody like Barack Obama.
Okay.
I think he's somebody who can be very charming, but somebody who has substance behind that, and is able to use a range of different skills, both in terms of the content of the message, but also in terms of how he packages that. He has that ability to be versatile. And I think the other thing that appeals to me, particularly about Barack Obama, is that in some ways is not what we would expect in terms of charisma. We often think about charisma as being about being loud, the life and soul of the party. And yes, it can be, but there is somebody who is at the heart of it an introvert, and yes, yet he's able to come out of that default way of being and to engage with people in a way which excites people. So I think that's really, really important, that actually people come away and we generate an energy that inspires other people, but also makes us more memorable.
That leads on to my next question. Do you need extreme? Do you need to be really confident or an extrovert to be charming? I think I think a lot of people's mind, people who have charm and that charisma often are very confident people. Do you need that? Do you need to be really confident or extrovert to be charming?
I definitely think you need to be confident. I think you need to own your story. I think you need to be comfortable in your own skin. And alongside that, you've got to have a degree of humility. It's important to be competent, but it's also important that actually we don't assume we've got the answers to everything, that actually we're genuinely interested in other people and their opinions and their feelings. So confidence is important. And I think charisma comes in lots of shapes and sizes. You've got to own it. And I work with a lot of people, very capable people, who often go into situations with a sense of the imposter syndrome, or they think they can only show certain aspects of themselves to other people. So part of my work is about making people more comfortable with themselves, so they can then go out into the world. And I think it's not necessarily the case that you need to be an extrovert. Some extroverts are very charismatic, but there are also lots of extroverts who aren't flexible in their approach. And so what that means is they often drown out or inhibit other people who've got very interesting things to say. So you've got to use your energy, whatever that might be, introvert or extrovert, in a way which is going to bring the best out in other people. So no one way is always appropriate. You've got to be flexible.
It's interesting you mentioned imposter syndrome. I hear that term used a lot. I think especially with people who start their own business and or perhaps sort of entrepreneurs in that way, and they're starting to do well and they have that imposter syndrome. Is that something you see a lot of people you work with, and that holds them back?
Absolutely. And I work with a lot of people, private individuals, but also people that are in the public eye, and it's common across the board. And part of the reason for that is because we don't own our story. We hide aspects of ourselves away. We discount our successes based on those bits of ourselves that we hide away. But also we don't give ourselves credit. On the whole, we're very good at picking up on our perceived faults and failures, and we hold on to those for years. But even small wins during the course of a day, we dismiss them. We don't register them. So part of it is about creating a fairer balance in terms of how we view ourselves and what we hold on to.
And do you think having charm or charisma, is it something that is like nature nurture? Is it something that anyone can learn? Do you see? Are some people naturally that way, or do you think most people actually it's a skill that you have to work and develop? What do you think?
I think it's a bit of both. I think if you look at anybody, even people who you might regard as being very charismatic, almost certainly they will have developed over the course of their life, whether that's with professional help or not. But I do think it's fair to say that people start at different places on that continuum. But wherever you are, there are still things that you can do to improve. And even if you're very charismatic, it's still important to recognize what it is that you bring to situations so that you can use it more deliberately and purposefully. But everybody has the ability to improve their level of charisma. And it's really about learning the skills alongside recognizing the value that we already have, and then starting to integrate those two elements. And I think where it tends to go wrong is when people learn the skills in a very rote fashion and they don't integrate them. So it feels clunky and it looks inauthentic to other people. So you've really got to practice these things, not just have a notion of what's involved. And it's the rehearsal that makes them more natural. So
it's not something just of benefit to corporate leaders or people sort of more leadership roles. It is a skill that perhaps everyone should master in, like as a skill in life?
I think so, because if you start to think about it, even if you don't work in an overt sales role, everybody in some form or another is selling something. You're selling an idea. You go to a party. You're selling yourself to gain popularity with people. Or if you're in a business, you're selling your products or you're selling your vision. So in different ways, we're having to influence people and inspire people and trying to align what's important to us with what's important to them. So for me, charisma is valuable in any walk of life.
And I'm very interested in the power of influence in growing your business, and how positively influencing others is an important skill in getting your message out there, or reaching the right people, and getting more sales. So I think influence is actually a very important skill. And I just have a question about how does perhaps using charm or your charisma relate to sort of persuasion skills, because often I think we see like we mentioned before, sales the very obvious one, and you meet people, but the better people who are at sales are people who have good very good charisma or very good charming. How do you see there's a link between charm and persuasion, and influence things?
Definitely. And I think where the worst kind of salesman, the thing that always makes me switch off, is when people talk at me. And I think actually it's one of those situations where often less is more. When we think about charisma and charm, we often think about it as being a performance, that I do something that dazzles you and impresses you. And actually, there are lots of people with quiet charisma, people who are very calm, give people reassurance, the sense of safety, and they actually encourage people to express themselves. And I think this is the key in any walk of life, but particularly when it comes to sales. It's about understanding people's situations and giving those validation, and wherever possible trying to then align with what's important with you, with what their hopes and fears are. So for me, sales and charisma do go hand in hand, because it really is about understanding what something means to somebody. And when they have objections, if all you're doing is talking at them, you're not adapting to the person that's in front of you. You're objectifying them. Everybody's different, and we need to connect with them so they feel safe enough to acknowledge what their hopes and fears are, and as a consequence, to allow us to adapt our message accordingly.
No, it makes sense. And Richard, another question. You mentioned in the beginning about PTSD. You work people. I mean, what is that to do with the charm element of what you do, or is that something different? How do you sort of work with people?
Well, I guess PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's often a situation that inhibits people's behaviour, and what it does is it often hijacks their emotions. So people react with extreme anxiety, people jump to conclusions, people react with extreme anger, or want to withdraw from situations, and that's the extreme end of the scale. But to a lesser degree, those are also the kind of things that will affect people in everyday situations, that we are driven by our emotions and our impulses. And when people think about charisma and they think about charm, they often think about it starting with a set of external behaviors. But for me, it really starts with how you manage your internal world. If you're not in command of your internal world, then you start to reduce your ability to be emotionally intelligent, to be flexible, and to see the person that's in front of you rather than objectifying. The more we hijack by our emotions, the less fully present we are in a situation. We start to lose our ability to connect with people.
I guess when people have that awareness and they develop these skills, then they're going to become more confident, and so it sort of builds layer on layer.
Absolutely. And in a funny kind of way, a lot of things when I'm working with coaching clients, charisma clients, for example, a lot of the skills that I teach them for managing their emotions are exactly the same types of skills that I use for people who've had severe PTSD. And I often say, if it works for them, it's absolutely going to work for you.
Okay.
So it's really important we manage those things, so we've got more ability to, as I say, be present, be flexible, and to adapt to what's presenting in front of us.
Would you say, with charm and charisma, there's there's perhaps misunderstanding about it, because you hear the terms and everyone has a view of what makes someone charming or what charisma is. Would you say there's a bit of misunderstanding of actually what that means? I mean, you explained what it is at the beginning of the interview, but would you say people misunderstand actually what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you ask 10 different people, they'll give you 10 different answers as to what it is. And this is just my definition. It's not the dictionary definition. But I do think that the commonality between a lot of people's opinions on this is that it's about putting on a performance. It's about dazzling people. It's about telling them what it is that they want to hear. And I think actually sometimes genuine charisma is sometimes about not being liked. It's about standing up for your principles and in effect having a brand whereby even if you're saying something that people don't want to hear, you're being true to yourself. Wherever possible, you're trying to align with what's important to other people, but you're actually being true to yourself. And that itself makes you memorable, that actually you've got the courage of your convictions to stand by what you believe. And people respect that, even if they don't always necessarily like it. So there'll be people that are actually charismatic who people have a strong reaction to and say, actually, I can't stand that person. But they'll still be able to, that person will still be memorable, and they'll still be able to rattle off a whole list of characteristics of that person. So, it's like the old adage, sometimes it's better to be talked about badly than not to be talked about at all.
No, I think you're right. I think there's, it sounds like a link to just that being assertive, and if you may not agree with someone, but you respect them if they are assertive in what they say and do.
Absolutely. I think assertive is a key word here. It's that you can have the courage of your convictions without necessarily being aggressive. You can agree to disagree, but say, right, this is my position, and as a result, you don't necessarily alienate people. People know where you stand.
I think first impressions are so important when you meet people, and particularly in situations like job interviews, or if you're making a sales pitch, in those first few sort of seconds, if you make the wrong impression, then that can end up in a negative result. Yeah. So I could see that learning the skills of charm and just those particular things could change that literally that first impression you make.
Definitely. And I think one of the ways in which people often fall short in those kind of situations is that they think if you want to call it a performance, it's not necessarily a word that I would use, but if you want to call it performance, when you meet somebody, people think that the work starts when the other person comes in the room, but actually it starts before that. It's a bit like a race. If you're a 100 meters runner, the race doesn't start when the gun goes. The race starts with your warm-ups. And it's exactly the same with any kind of social interaction. If you want to make the right impression, you've got to mentally and physically prepare yourself before you go in there. And those are the kind of things that I often work with people before we even get onto things like body language and use of voice and presentation skills.
So would you, when you're coaching people, do you sort of give them almost a checklist or exercise to do before they, they have a common situation they struggle with, and do you give them a training? Do you give them a sort of a checklist of things to do before they enter the situation where they need to use these skills?
Yeah, absolutely. And it will vary from person to person. Some people come and they've got very specific requirements in terms of what they want to work on. Other people, that they'll come and say, right, just give me a complete review and tell me where you think I'm going wrong or where I could improve. But yeah, when it comes to things like how you manage yourself and prepare internally, there are essentially a list of checks that you can run through before you go into a situation, and depending on what's happening for you, different activities that you can be employing to help you to manage that, or to improve a particular energy level that you want to bring into that situation.
And in your in the Metro article, you mentioned, or you said about how charisma can help with well-being. Can you explain a bit more about this?
Yeah, well, any situation that we go into has an impact upon our physical well-being and our mental well-being. And if you take an extreme example of that, if you are constantly in conflict with people, or you're constantly feeling like you're not connecting with people, or your ideas are being ignored, then that is going to have an impact upon your energy levels and how you feel about yourself and the world around you. So I guess when charisma works for us, it's about getting more of what we want from situations. And as a consequence, we like to have more energy, we like to feel more satisfied and contented, and we like to feel more connected to other people. And all the research shows, for example, that when we have healthy relationships with people, we're more like to live longer and to have better quality of life.
No, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of mental health issues that arise through the work situation with stress and frustration, and certainly I think that as you say, if you can avoid those by building better relationships, then that's a key thing. So it's interesting to hear you say there's that relationship there. If someone wanted to become a better communication, they're struggling with that. Do you think addressing improving your charisma skills goes hand in hand with public speaking skills, or do you think it goes hand? Do you think it that sort of, or leadership skills? Do you think it's one of those things that works well with with other skills like that?
Yeah, it's often an area that I and my team get asked to work, and we'll get individuals coming to us. And one of the triggers for coming is concerns about how it is when they present. So we often do work around that, and we often get people to film themselves when they're in work situations, and then we critique that, or even we get them to do exercises in the coaching sessions, and then we watch those back together. And it's often uncomfortable viewing for people, but it actually fast tracks that learning, because when we come away from situations, we only have a limited view of how it is that we've come across. So actually seeing that and hearing that played back really helps us to get into the granular detail. And once you get beyond that discomfort, you can then start to look at lots of practical things that you can start to implement that very quickly can improve that. So yeah, it's a very common area we get asked to help with.
Because I think it needs one skill to communicate effectively and engage with people in real life, or to move online increasingly. It's almost a different skill, well, same principles, to engage with people on camera, whether it's a Zoom call or whether it's a YouTube. Is the principles the same, or do you find, because I think some people I know, great speaking, giving a pitch in a room on stage, but then when they're put in front of the camera, they just struggle. Their body language changes. Is that something you've noticed about?
Yeah, it's very true, and we've recently done a very big rollout of exactly this, teaching with a pharmaceutical company, teaching their people how to better communicate using charisma online, because a lot of people they rely heavily upon cues that they're getting from other people, and I guess when we're doing it through a platform like we are today, you only see a limited part of people's bodies, but also some people switch the cameras off. Don't they? And I guess when we're not in a room as well, if you're a group of people, sure, some people instinctively hide more. They don't give as much away about how they're receiving your message. So we tend to rely on those positive strokes, sure, to keep going. So the kind of things that we would look at around that are how it is that you can more actively engage your audience, so you get that reassurance, but also how it is that you can bolster yourself. So if you're getting an audience that are not very receptive, doesn't necessarily mean anything bad's happening, but how it is that you can give yourself the encouragement to stay focused. And a lot of people start to get thrown when the room's going quiet. It doesn't sure necessarily mean anything bad is happening, but just a lack of feedback. So we look at those kind of things, but we also look at how it is that you actually need to rely more on your voice. So when people can't see your body as much, your voice comes into play much, much more.
Okay.
How you structure your sentences, your choice of words, the kind of things that normally we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. We tend to think about the content of what we're saying, and we tend to rely upon the visual element a lot of the time. So we have to bring some of these other resources into play more.
And when you meet people who come to you for some coaching, do you sort of observe them straight away? You meet them and start thinking, observe their body language, observing the way they speak, and sort of straight away seeing how they are with their communication or their charisma. Is that something you do? Is that part of your?
Yeah, I guess it's part of parcel of who I am and the job that I've done for so long. It's the part I have to switch off when I go to parties and things like that. Yeah, absolutely. People come in the room and you start to register what they're doing, what works well, what immediately sort of has an adverse reaction. And I guess you have to kind of meet people where they're at. If you kind of throw all of that feedback at somebody straight away, that could be overwhelming. It could be disheartening in some cases. So you've almost sort of got to drip feed this information in based on how sort of resilient you think somebody is, but also how immediately pressing a particular area might be for them. It might be that you notice something that for them is not necessarily impacted upon their day-to-day experience. So you kind of got to bracket these things and feed them as it feels appropriate to the conversation.
And with the people who sort of approach you, does it tend to be one specific thing they really fear? So, for example, a fear of pitching in front of a panel of people, is that particular thing holds them back and they're terrified. And they're good at one-to-one, they're good at networking, but one specific thing, or is it people that more overall know that they're not very good at engaging with people and generally, and they want to improve it? Would it tend to be very specific things or more of an overall area they know they need to improve?
It's a whole host of things. I guess the most common one is very senior people. People are either looking to make the next step up in their career, or people who are maybe balancing lots of dynamics within the company, and they want to be able to connect with different people and give them reassurance and get people aligned. So we get a lot of that sort of thing. We get a lot of people who, for example, with relationships, people who are struggling to find relationships. And as you say, it's because they feel they can't connect with people. So we work with that. But I guess the vast majority of people is about presenting skills, and that can be at any level. It could be sort of fairly junior people, but you also find it with a lot of senior people. People who for years have as much as possible tried to actively avoid getting in these situations, and when they do have to do it, it's really traumatic for them. And part of that is because they're trying to avoid it. It makes it into a bigger thing. So we teach them to sort of gradually build their confidence up around those things, but also to try and actively seek those situations out. Yeah, so actually it's the incremental effect of doing these things repeatedly that, as much as anything else, helps to make you more comfortable with it. If it's something you avoid and you only do it under pain of death, then of course straight away there's a lot more pressure and emphasis on it.
I think, I can associate that. I think avoidance, we all have things we avoid. I think it's true. The more you avoid it, the bigger it is, and then you build it up worse and worse, and it's often not as bad as you think. But yeah, definitely, it's something we do.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
So you mentioned about voice and body language. With communication, following what you said, I think most people know that it's very little about what you say. It's mostly body language and tone of voice. Is that, with what you work on, would you say that that's very much true? Body language, most important thing, then tone of voice. Is body language the biggest element of what makes difference?
I think it is. So for most people, their preferred modality is visual.
Right.
So they instinctively, even if they don't know they're registering it, their brain is processing all this information. So we often come away from situations with feelings about things, don't we, without necessarily being able to put our finger on what it is. It's because the brain is constantly processing thousands of pieces of information that are outside of our conscious awareness. But voice also plays a part. Absolutely. Yeah, and we're essentially sophisticated animals, and we put far too much, it's important, but we put far too much emphasis upon rational, tangible things. And actually, for the bigger part of human existence, this is what we relied on. Before we had language, we relied upon the sound that people made, or the way that they held their body, the way that they moved, to tell us how much trust we could put in people. And the same still applies to this day and age.
Following on from that, would you say that, do you feel that people are losing their, a lot of people, we so much, depending on technology, and we use social media, the statistics, how long we spend online, It's quite, I think, quite shocking. Would you say that as a skill, when we are perhaps not as good as communicating as we used to be, and we're getting a bit more insular in that way, through technology. So
I think that's true. I think the way that we use technology, texting, posting on social media, those sorts of things, it tends to lend itself to very quick responses. And as a consequence, people often say things in ways that weren't intended or that were said in the heat of the moment. And when we become reliant upon that, actually we become quite lazy. I work with a lot of organizations. You get people who sat next to each other, who email each other rather than talking to each other. And it starts to become the norm. And so we lose this comfort with connecting with people. And when we're sending messages, we don't necessarily pick up on the emotional nuances that sit beneath it because we don't hear them say it. We don't see them say it. So absolutely, it's a place for social media and texting, but we rely upon it too much. And what I tend to say to people is, if in any way your message could be misinterpreted or in any way there's an emotional element to what you're saying, number one, think about pausing before you do that. But if you are going to broach a subject, try and broach it with the person face to face. And if not face to face, at least where you can see them on a screen like this or on the telephone where you can hear their voice. Because it's very hard to retract something once you've said it.
It's true. I think we form habits very easily, and then it's hard to break those habits. So sometimes we know we should be walking across the office, the other desk, and then speaking in person. But sometimes it's we get into a bad habit of emailing people, and it's wrong, but because it's a habit, it's hard to change. And I think that's
absolutely. I think that's perhaps been heightened as well by having the various lockdowns and working from home. And I think what we're seeing now is more and more people packing more and more things into their day. So whereas you might have had a number of meetings in the office and you would have a break to move between different meeting rooms, now you just click a button and you're into the next meeting. And as a consequence, we're not having that period to process what's just happened, but also to think about how it is that we're feeling and how it is that we want to be in that next meeting. So you're getting the build-up of all these emotions that are then coming out in ways that are not necessarily appropriate for our well-being, but also in terms of our quality of connection with other people.
It's interesting what you say. I've got a friend who started a job and went into it. We're briefly went into the office, but then from the next day he was just online, so he didn't meet any of the team apart from the manager who met him in the office. And he would have a weekly Zoom call with and little thumbnails on the screen. And he said he found it really hard to real form connection with the people he's working with and sort of get to know them and feel like he knew them at all, because he only talked to them through small pictures on the Zoom screen. And he said, because I'd never met them in the real world, it just he struggled to. And I think that's an interesting point about what's happening, recently.
It's tough, isn't it? It's tough. So we're packing these meetings in, but also when we're in these meetings, you don't have that natural thing that you might have had before, where somebody gets there a little bit early and you have a bit of a personal chat with them before the main meeting, or a couple of people hover back. It's people press a button and they're gone.
Sure. Yeah, it's true. It's true. So, I mean, Richard, I love this topic. It's fascinating, and I could talk to you for hours. But we're going to have to sort of bring it to close. But what I wanted to was, could you share some top tips for people who perhaps watch this interview and they want to be, they want to see, work on it, be, better at building a charm or, charisma? Any top tips you can share?
Well, I think the simplest thing you can do is start to become more aware of your emotions and your physicality. And the way to do that, simplest, well, there are lots of ways. The simplest way to do this is, even if you have a busy life, just pausing in between activities, even for just 30 seconds, putting your feet flat on the floor, taking a few breaths, and just noticing how you're feeling. Because when you become aware how you're feeling, number one, it gives you an opportunity to influence that if it's not helpful. Or alternatively, even if it's something that you're not able to manage in that period of time, at least the fact that you're aware of it means that you might tread more carefully in terms of how you go into that next situation. So taking stock of how you feel periodically throughout the day is really, really important. I also think it's really important to start to readdress the balance in terms of how we view ourselves and our situations. So again, very simple thing you can do is every day, spend a little bit of time at the end of each day, reflecting back on your day, thinking about your achievements, but also thinking about what you've brought to situations or how it is that you've progressed things, even if they haven't been completed, or even if it's been a horrendous day, how is it that you've learned from that? So in other words, charting your progression. What have I learned from today that in some way is making me stronger for tomorrow? And that attitude is what we call a growth mindset. Developing a growth mindset is a great way to improve yourself, but taking that into your conversations with other people is also a great way of inspiring other people and making them more positively predisposed towards you. So it's recognizing where there are areas for you to improve, but it's also showing them that dynamism that says, right, I'm taking this head on. I'm trying to improve day to day.
Great tips. Thanks for that, Richard. And just lastly, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Is it for your website, or what's the best way people to find out more?
Yeah, so you can either get in contact via our website, which is www.pinnaclewellbeingmedia.com, or you can call us on 0207 060 4375.
Great. So thank you very much, Richard. So that is a fascinating chat with Richard about charm and charisma. And do subscribe to this channel. There'll be more interviews with other people who are sharing their expertise, sharing their story, sharing how to improve your mindset or your skill set in life. So yes, thank you very much, Richard, and it was great chatting to you.
Thanks, Nick.